I think that,
Are you recommending consent agenda for the 27th?
No, for July, for the regular July meeting.
My only concern about delay till July is, well, it's obviously just one new member, but, you know, but this
yeah.
composition of folks has a,
I
you
get
know,
now, I mean, I
understanding
don't want to, you know, make this to be an impediment to
Right.
forward progress, if you will, but I just trying to be just a compromise.
Well, then, would you be willing for the June meeting to submit your questions, or?
No, she's answered my questions.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You know, the only hesitation, if you move it to July, about putting on a consent agenda, is you will have an additional person who won't even know what it means, consent agenda, and they won't have the chance of doing. So I think it either needs to be in July action agenda, or it needs to be before this board rotates off. Does that make
Which would be
sense?
today, or?
Right.
Okay.
So,
I'm fine
I
with.
mean, Wita's here, but, you know, this is
I
new to
move that
her
we,
too.
Place this item on the action agenda for today.
Okay. And get a second. Second by Dr. Barth, and then we need 2/3. Well, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so one opposed, that would meet the 2/3 requirement. So it's now on the agenda. Now, I guess we need a motion as to whether or not to adopt the MOU.
I move to adopt the MOU.
Moved by Ms. Rice to adopt the MOU as stated and included in Report 5 by Ms. Harriman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Savers. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
One opposed.
May I bring this to you and have you sign it? On the break? On the break?
Yes.
Okay,
on the
thank
break,
you.
On the break. We've got two more. Are you finished?
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
I
Appreciate
didn't want to
it.
dismiss you if
Thank
you
you
weren't.
for all your work. You and Vicki.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
We're taking a 10-minute break. We're taking a break until 11:15.
What did they have for y'all
Yeah,
to eat
right.
last night? Did you order off the menu or?
You stay till the very end of your last meeting. Actually, and I need to go answer this.
We are getting in the car. The garden burger at Penguin is the best.
Which one?
quote garden. There's a place called
I need a signature.
Yeah, you just need one dessert, one appetizer.
Oh, signing. We're now ready for our learning services report. Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Good morning. I did submit a report kind of highlighting several of our units within our division, but want to take some time this morning and talk a little bit more about assessment because that seems where we're having some questions coming from. Before we get into it, though, I did want to say that our test scores for ACT Aspire will come in July 1st. And so next month or in the month of August, I'm really going to kind of leave it up to what you guys would like to come in and do a full presentation with slides so that you can see the actual scores, where we are as a state. We can do that in July or we can do that in August. If we do it in July, we'll be pushed to, you probably won't have your 10 days of all your documentation beforehand, but we can get it up as soon as possible. So that's just really up to you if you want it in July or August.
What's the pleasure of the board?
I think I would leave it up to you. I think earlier is better, and would set a good precedent for the future, but, you know.
We can absolutely have it ready by the board meeting in July. And I agree. I think earlier is better. By the time August starts, we're going to be, schools are starting, and so getting it all out and knowing exactly where we are. So we'll be ready for that in July board meeting.
Great.
Okay. I did want to highlight and give a minute of praise to the assessment unit. This year we went 100% online testing. Over 1.5 million ACT Aspire assessments were given, individual assessments were given. In that number, we really, I'm sorry, what?
How many? Over?
1.5 million. You had 5 different assessments, individual assessments, and then you had students in grades 3 through 10 taking that ACT Aspire assessment. And so out of all those assessments, we only had about 2% of technical difficulties. That is huge. And much credit goes to the assessment unit and the preparation that they went into the year, preparing district testing coordinators, how to implement, how to load. Also the week of testing, they had their phone lines going. We had ACT Aspire folks in the state that we directly sent to districts that had issues last year or it was their first year to do online testing to support. If a district called us and said something's not working right, we were able to send assistance to them directly. But that really goes to Hope Allen and her unit and the planning and preparation that they put in forth. So I just want to publicly, or wherever she is behind me, tell her thank you for the work she did. It was an amazing job. We had some questions about within the learning services document. It talked about some time changes we were going to have next year, and Dr. Barth had asked a couple of questions about that. So I've asked Hope to come down. She's also going to talk a little bit about the linking study that we have within our ACT contract of linking the benchmark, the PARC, and the ACT Aspire scores, so that we're looking at consistency for our state and our students. So I'm going to let Hope come up right now and get a little bit more into the assessment piece.
Thank you. So I handed you this document here. I know that there were questions about the changes in the testing times for next year. So the tables that you have in front of you outline the test times for next year, and then the second table outlines the increase on each test. So when I called Aspire and asked about the reasoning for this, that they said that through their research they found that there was evidence of speediness in many of the grade levels towards the end of the test. They saw that students were answering much quicker, and so due to that they made the decision to add time at the end. In order to take care of the equating, they will do an equating this summer between the Form 2, which is what Arkansas gave with the times from last year, and Form 3, which is the form we will be giving next year. So that equating has happened. They will also do an equating next summer across all 4 forms, so that to make sure that the score, because we're increasing times and we're changing a few of the test items, the number of test items that are on there, that those scores are equivalent. They also, you can see at the very bottom, on some of the assessments, specifically English grades 3, 4, and 5, the multiple choice items will increase. And then in mathematics grades 3, 4, and 5, they're going to remove one constructed response and replace that with some multiple choice items to help with that speediness problem so that students aren't being rushed, that we're not testing how quickly they can answer, but they have sufficient time. So the point values will still stay the same, the scaling will still stay the same. Aspire, the way they wrote their blueprint is not based on number of items, but it's based on percentage of points. So a constructed response may get a higher percentage of points, and so they make sure that each form has the same number of points available at the same level of difficulty.
Is it possible to get the results of everything except the writing more quickly?
No, because the math and the science and the reading all have constructed response on them as well.
Okay.
The only one that we could potentially get quicker would be English, but the way they do scoring, that is an ELA score that we're looking for.
I also thought it was amusing that we are changing tests to take less time, and then we ask the people to add time. And I thought Pearson's going to go, will you people never be happy?
Exactly. And there has been concerns across our state about writing being too short. The 30 minutes is not enough time. We have expressed those concerns to ACT. We had a DTC debrief 2 weeks ago. We brought all our DTCs in, and they shared what was going on in their school, and that was consistently heard. So I don't know that we'll see an increase in writing time, but we have expressed that to ACT. To speak specifically to the linking study, ACT is going to conduct a linking study. We have shared with them the appropriate data from Benchmark and PARC. They are going to produce a concordance table or conduct a linking study that will show us how the PARC scores link to the ACT scores. ACT Aspire scores. We will then take that before our personal technical advisory committee and have them sign off on that sometime in August when we have our first meeting with them. We are reconfiguring our technical advisory committee at the moment, and their first meeting will be in August. That will be one of the first things on their agenda. ACT will come in and present to them what they found, and then they will sign off for Arkansas saying that is sound or it's not. Do you have any further questions about assessment?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Thank you. Thanks for coming
Yep.
coming down for this. On the linking process. So if they let's say they're good to go in August, what's our possible timeline for then doing calculations on those schools that have been in academic distress, whether they would have gotten over the hurdle? Do we know?
I would have to ask Annette's team just to be sure on that. I do know that there will be a period of corrections, just as there always has been in August. I could foresee very quickly thereafter they could do the calculations more closely to what we had under Benchmark, where you received those calculations late fall into early January time. So I don't know for sure, but we can find out for you.
Okay. On the time adjustments, obviously it's the same test, but with longer time. I mean, based on your expertise, at what point does the change in time actually alter the test in a way? In that, obviously it's still comparing oranges, but it might be different types of oranges, right? Because
Right.
of the additional time. Are you concerned about these additions to time, which is not insignificant percentage on the English side,
Right.
really making this a different test?
I don't, because we did hear reports from schools that they did feel like students were sped through the assessment. So the fact that they are adding time actually makes me feel much better about getting a good gauge of where our students are. Now, as far as technically at what point do you actually change the construct of the assessment, I would have to talk with some of our experts about that. But I do trust that them adding this time and then going through the equating process next summer does ensure for us that we're going to get equal results.
Okay, so there will be a process
Yes, sir.
anew next year.
They're
Okay.
going to do a vertical and a horizontal equating. So you're going to get equating both directions. They'll do that this summer and next summer to ensure that we're getting equivalent results.
Cool. Obviously, one thing that was a big point of concern last summer when we were shifting tests was the accommodation issue. What has ACT and ACT Aspire, have they made progress on accommodations?
I would say yes. We have been working very closely with them, talking about trying to focus on what states really need for accommodations versus what they had available. So there are things like refreshable braille that are coming for our students that we didn't currently have this year that would allow our visually impaired students to be on the same playing field as our non. Also, there's some things that were non-accommodation level this year that will be becoming accommodation level next year, which is good for our students because then we can see what accommodations are actually being used because it will have to be marked in the system. So I think there are things they're continually working on to provide more accommodations in the system. For example, one that was not available this year was the visual overlay. We have many students that are colorblind. And so this year, if they were colorblind, they had to physically tape something to the screen, their appropriate overlay so they could read. Next year, that's built into the system. So there's things like that they are making improvements, and we'll continue to work with them.
Thanks. I think my final question is, what was our opt-out percentage? Do we know what was?
I
And,
don't.
and how much variation was there across the state on that?
Right, because the state law does not allow, says that all students will participate in the state assessment program. We instructed schools that there is no opt-out, that if students are there, then they are to be tested. We will have data once our scores come back about the number of students that refuse to test, and we could look at that and see if there's some correlation there,
Cool.
what those numbers are.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I had a question earlier that they said when you got in the room, we'd let you talk about.
Oh, okay, yes.
Mr. Harvey made a good point that a grade of B is over a period of time, and the test is a point in time. But do you know how recently Pearson has checked the ACT for gender and race prejudice?
Yes. So I actually received a report after I heard Mr. Harvey speak about that was conducted in 2011, 2012. It was an external study. So ACT took their test and designed their test and then sent that to 2 external committees. And those 2 committees reviewed the test for bias. And then there's an entire report on that and showing the findings that we will share with the board and make that available. But within that, and I didn't have much time to read through it in depth, but they did find some areas where there could potentially be bias. And so I've asked ACT for some information about what they're going to do in the future to look at bias and maybe to lessen that bias across the board, and I'll share that with you when I have it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you.
No, thank you.
Do you have any other questions about the learning services update? Or Dr. Brock?
I did have one on the Schools of Innovation.
Yes, sir.
Approvals. Could you describe kind of what those look like? Obviously, we got some ALE and at least one ALE, but in terms of the traditional schools, what are the kind of themes of those innovation?
We saw similar things that you're seeing when schools were coming before you with 1240 waivers and with charter schools. You saw several of the career fields. You saw a lot of making partnerships with businesses and doing them more in-depth career pathways, mentoring. You saw several of those. You saw some proficiency standards-based pieces in there where they were looking at flexible seat time. But we really kind of saw a pattern of some of the same things we've seen through the other waivers.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
I have a question, and I'll talk about while it's learning services because it's not computer science. And you may answer, or the commissioner or legal, somebody. When you have a law that was passed, like the dyslexia law, which we're still working on getting final approval on that, if a school district is not implementing that law, does that fall under when the accreditation looks into it? Does it fall under it's not special ed anymore, so it won't affect special ed funding? What is there any way to assure the parents within districts that their child is getting what the law requires that district to?
Okay. As far as being a part of standards for accreditation, if it's not specifically a standard, then we don't have the authority or frankly the manpower to go out and make sure that every school district is complying with every law that's in our ever-growing law book. So, you know, as far as what the remedy would be, you know, I hesitate to ever encourage someone to pursue legal action against a school district, but the way school districts are structured in Arkansas are such that those local school districts are responsible for complying with the laws that the General Assembly has given them to comply with. So the enforcement mechanism would really have to come through the court rather than through the department or the state board, unless the General Assembly has given the department or the state board specific enforcement authority, which in the case of dyslexia, they have not.
No, because I know in special ed, there's a series, you know, you have a local hearing, and then you have a state hearing, and then you have an arbitration, you know, there's a process, so the parents, unless they choose to have an attorney, don't have to pay any money to be able to get the service for the child. But with this, since it's not under special ed, I just didn't know if it just had to jump directly, you know, and I certainly would not encourage that. I'm not litigious. But, so we're having a conference.
Mr. Harvey did inform me that we added the complying with the dyslexia law to the statement of assurance, which superintendents sign every year. It's how many items? Probably 80? Okay, 130 items that each superintendent certifies that they are complying with. Again, the enforcement of that. But at least there's documentation that the superintendent, by his or her signature, has acknowledged that they are supposed to be complying with.
And the
those
Bureau of
laws.
Legislative Research, you know, had that, and so many said they were, but there were still, I think they said like 5,000 kids, and out of, let's round it up, 500,000, that's 1%, and they're saying a low number might be 10%. So, you know, I don't know.
I will say that in the last year, we saw it's kind of a turn in schools as far as addressing dyslexia within their buildings. We got to the point where we did have dyslexia specialists at all of our co-ops. They all have been trained. They meet with Vicki King regularly. Those dyslexia specialists at the co-ops, they go out and meet with their individual districts. We've asked all of them to check with all their districts to make sure that they have a program, and we get positive results with that. We have embedded dyslexia professional development pretty much in all of our literacy PD. The multisensory approach to teaching is something that it's not about going to a dyslexia professional development. You're going to a reading professional development, and those strategies and things that teachers need to be aware of are taught within that. Right. So that's across the board. Our new grade level reading initiative that we're kicking off this next year, that's going to be a huge part of it. The instructional strategies, you have a lot of students who are going to be in that percentage of being considered dyslexic, but they're mild, and a lot of their needs can be met in the classroom if you have an appropriately trained teacher. We're still, school districts are still at that point of trying to determine how they analyze the curriculum that they're using to determine if it's the best to meet the needs of the students in their school that are struggling the most. That is an area here at the department that we're trying to assist and help schools. The dyslexia resource guide folks, they came together and put together some resources for schools to look at, and we got pushback from vendors about not being on the list. So, you've got the corporate world and you've got your schools. School districts still have the authority, the local districts have the authority to choose the curriculum that they use to instruct. We've been very clear as a department about what components must be within a dyslexia program. They are outlined clearly in the law. Districts have to determine whether or not the program they're picking has those components. It's the same way with a math curriculum or social studies curriculum. The standards are set forth. This is what you're expected to teach, and districts are to go through and look at that. So,
And I know that the department and the PD and, you know, I keep up with that very closely. Y'all are doing everything you can, and you're not an enforcer of it. So, you know, ultimately it gets down to the principal and the teachers and parents.
I do think, though, that as time continues to go on, I mean, from my first year here with dyslexia to the second year, huge changes. And I mean, it was forward progress. The dyslexia conference that we held, the number of attendees showed that school districts wanted to know. They wanted information. We are planning and already have a date reserved for another dyslexia conference this next year. The Guy Fenter Co-op, they are hosting a dyslexia conference in the fall. So we are continuing to see momentum in that area.
Yeah.
So it's one that I'm proud of because I feel like we have some people at ADE who are working very hard in that area.
Oh, I know they are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Mr. Owen, report 7, computer sciences report.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Thank you. I just want to take a personal moment and thank the board for your service. I know that y'all's commitment is great, and I want to extend additional appreciation to the 2 members who are exiting the board, and you will be missed. But I know the governor has done a great job in finding your replacements. Maybe your successors would be a better word, but I do want to thank y'all for your work. I also want to take a moment to invite you. I had to step out of a meeting upstairs in room 201A. We actually are hosting the Computer Science Task Force meeting here today. It will take place until we're estimating about 1:30, and at that point we're actually going to take a little journey across I-630 to the Arkansas Children's Hospital, who is hosting Camp Wanna Code this afternoon. So they are actually hosting a coding competition, so the task force arranged for a little trek for them. Just to give you a brief update, I handed out an addendum to the report that y'all received, and will be willing to answer any questions over that. And then I have a couple positive things that I would like to point out before I leave.
Any questions for Mr. Owen?
Good work.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave on a couple positive things. I like to go out and when I speak to other groups, and nobody from AD has thrown anything at me yet, but I like to tell people that I do have the funnest job in state government, and I do remain committed to that statement. I also want to point out that a couple different things. One, I heard some discussions before I had to step out from my meeting about the EAST initiative. And I want to tell you that the computer science work that we're doing in Arkansas not only is supporting our students, but is supporting great partner organizations like EAST. Whenever I bring the 912 computer science standards for y'all's consideration in August, one thing that I really am proud of out of this committee work is our independent study recommendations that we're going to make to this board. And we think that that's going to play high that's really going to help out our EAST students quite a bit. And I actually was invited to present to the EAST board this past week. And as I was going over some of the thought processes, and I did tell them that it was all subject to state board approval, but as I was explaining some of the thought processes, they were genuinely excited about the possibilities of how their EAST students could expand into the computer science world and support this initiative. So we are gaining not only our national attention and doing things, things that are getting national attention, but we're also supporting our industry and our educational partners here in Arkansas through this initiative. Very early on, whenever I took this position, I was asked, what is the biggest challenge? And I had said from day one is teacher capacity. And that's two-faceted. That's number of teachers and also the skills that the teachers have. And I'm not sure, I believe the commissioner shared this with you all in both paper and digital format, but we were actually featured, Arkansas was featured in Ed Week this past week. And the headline is Arkansas School Coding Initiative Centers on Teacher PD. And the lady there in the center, Ms. Tammy Glass, is actually one of the individuals that served on our 912 standards writing committee. Very energetic lady. She's been working with Daniel Moix, who is a great asset to the state of Arkansas at ASM, and ASMSA is a great asset to the state of Arkansas in this initiative. And we remain committed to making sure that we have teachers in place to support our students and our schools. And I think with the round of grants that we have just announced and put out there, that we are demonstrating that commitment not only in word but financial. And then I think we're receiving some due attention to the state for those efforts. So I want to thank you for your support. I couldn't do half of what I'm able to do without the support of the board, the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, the assistant commissioners, and our governor. So thank you for making my job, I won't say easy, but easier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Owen? If not, that concludes our meeting. If we get a
Move to adjourn.
move to adjourn, is there a second? Second? All in favor, stand up.
Shall we give you an applause on the way out?
Better way.